Hello, fermented folks and fellow bleeders of orange and black. We are here with our first collaborative panel interview between the Fermented Fiction podcast and the We Bleed Orange and Black podcast. So that is me, Clay Vermullen, representing Fermented Fiction, and my co host, Jeff C. Carter, here today representing the Bleeders of Orange and Black on the We Bleed Orange and Black podcast. Today, we have three very exciting guests, three Stoker nominated authors here to discuss the writing of the contemporary horror novel. We're going to go around the table and introduce everybody here, and then we'll get into some of our panel discussion questions. But first, I'll introduce myself, just in case you don't know who I am. I'm Clay Vermullen. I am the host of Fermented Fiction, which is another podcast that I will link in the bio. And I am also a horror author of contemporary dark fiction myself. My main project right now is a trilogy of rock climbing horror novellas through Dark Forest Press. Book 2, Cairn, is coming out May 2nd. So if you're into that kind of thing, check that out. We'll move on to Jeff C. Carter. Jeff, go ahead and introduce yourself to the fine people of the fermented realm. And tell us what you're working on, and we'll keep going around.
Hello, fermented folks. I'm Jeff C. Carter. I host We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. You can join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. I'm happy to be with you guys here today to talk about the Stoker noms. How's it going, guys?
It's going great. I guess I'm up next. I am AC Wise. I am the author of the novels Wendy Darling, Hooked, and my most recent Ballad of the Bone Road, which came out just in January. I am honored to be with these fine folks today. My novelette, Wolf Moon, Antler Moon, is a finalist for the Stoker Award. It's my second time around being nominated, which is absolutely lovely. I write both short and long fiction, and I also do regular short fiction reviews for Locus Magazine and Apex Magazine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neena Viel, and I'm here because my debut novel, Listen to Your Sister, which came out last year, was nominated for a Stoker. What? And my sophomore novel, my second novel, actually comes out on May 26th. It's called I'll Watch Your Baby. Other things about me, I live on Whidbey Island, so in the greater kind of Seattle area. You can consider it that. Crazy about dogs, and I train mine to do really useless things that no one will ever need to know. And I'm so excited to not only talk about Listen to Your Sister, but to get my second book out in the world. I mean, I might throw up, but it'll be like an excited level of throw up. That's where I'm at right now.
Hi there, I'm Grace Daly. I am the author of The Scald Crow, which is my debut novel, and it is currently a finalist for the Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel, just like Neena. And I am invisibly disabled. I have multiple chronic illnesses, and my writing always features representations of disability. And that's like the big focus of my writing. I have a novella coming out later this year that is a fantasy comedy called The Star of Kilnaley. The Scald Crow is also a horror comedy. Everything I do is like dash comedy, mostly like horror, fantasy, and sci-fi comedies. Yeah, I've written some short fiction, but mostly I like to focus on like novella and novel length works, though you can find all my short fiction on my website too.
The first question that's going to kick off our panel today: what are the unique challenges, rewards, and considerations for writing novels in the modern horror genre? And you can jump on any one of those watchwords or take them all. If someone has a comment on what you mean by modern horror versus maybe retro or classic horror, and hopefully there's a lot of rewards, I want to hear about that. Let's start with AC.
I guess the first thing that came to my mind is, the modern times, at least that we're living in, are fairly horrifying in and of themselves, which can sometimes make, horror challenging as a genre. As some people kind of want to pull back from that or feel like there's, enough horror in day-to-day life that they don't necessarily want to be immersed in that as a reader, as a viewer, or even as a writer. Personally, I actually find horror rewarding both as a writer and a reader, and I guess even a consumer of media. It's sort of one of my go-to, I guess, comfort reads, comfort watches, and I feel like there's a lot of catharsis that horror fiction offers. So, regardless of how horrifying the real world can be, it's still kind of the fiction that I turn to most often. Just, whether it's dealing with a horror that's safely contained on the page or just sort of, working through my own thoughts and feelings and emotions in a way that sort of is both fictional, but also feels like almost therapeutic in a way, I guess. So I think those are some of the, simultaneous challenges and rewards of horror in the current day.
Hmm.
And AC, what do you think are some specific considerations you have to make when deciding to write horror, especially in the long form, given those challenges and rewards?
I mean, I guess sort of with anything, well, I guess with sort of writing any genre, there's, kind of striking the balance between, following what you are passionate about, but also sort of, doing the things that will pull the reader along with you. And it's very hard to know sort of, what's going to grab a reader and what isn't going to grab a reader. I mean, I've seen, some editors kind of give the advice to, to stay away from body horror completely, or to stay away from certain topics. But I think it's not necessarily sort of I think it's actually a good thing, but to sort of, approach things respectfully, horror just for the sake of horror, throwing blood at the screen just for the sake of throwing blood at the screen. Spatterpunk obviously has its place, but I do think, that whatever horrors you're presenting in your fiction should serve the story, should serve the purpose, and not just be sort of shock for the sake of shock, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that's necessarily a thing that's, tied specifically to modern horror fiction, or even, horror fiction to the longer form. But I do feel like, sort of more authors and more creators are thinking about that a little bit more. I mean, I think there was sort of a time, maybe like in the 80s, where the stereotype really was like, oh, just churn this out, whether it's slasher films or, slasher novels that get sort of the bloody typeface on them, where people, or again, at least the stereotype was that people didn't really care as much about the content. It was just about mass producing things and trying to sell them. And horror these days, it does seem like there's room for a broader spectrum of things: psychological horror, slipstream horror, genre blending horror, thoughtful, quiet horror films that, don't even really have any jump scares or any blood, but are still, tense and very effective, which is really lovely to see. I feel like I digressed a little bit, maybe didn't answer your question, but there you go.
I think you answered it so thoroughly that it felt like a digression. So excellent work. And speaking of broadening the spectrum of horror, that's something both of our other guests have done a great job of doing. Nina, Grace, either of you particularly eager to jump on this question next?
Me. Let me at it. Let me at it.
Get it.
Um,
It's
I
yours.
think it's such a great question. It's something I've put a lot of thought into, because to me, the contemporary novel, like what makes it a contemporary horror novel, is that it's grounded in these real life fears that are ubiquitous to a certain time period. So I just picked up a copy of The Curse of Hester Gardens. I'm not all the way into it yet, but it is about a woman living in the projects, and you can see that it's really about like gun violence, not necessarily. I mean, there's a supernatural element, but it's the gun violence that you're really there to discuss in that book. And so that kind of is an example to me of what makes a contemporary horror novel, which means that the long runway sometimes to publishing, I always wonder, like, is this book going to actually hit the market at a time when these issues are still very much pending? Unfortunately, or fortunately for Tamika Thompson, gun violence is still very much an issue, but it's always something on my mind. So like I wrote Listen to Your Sister, I think that first draft maybe 5 years ago, and it just came out last year. So I'm always wondering when a book finally hits and it's contemporary and it is really grounded in an issue, is it going to, will that issue still be relevant? Will people still be talking about it? Art really imitates life, and horror, like any other kind of medium, is a reflection of the sorts of experiences that people have on a daily basis, or not so daily. But you can really see kind of what's bubbling up in the cultural zeitgeist through certain trends in books. But you also can't, we got to write what we got to write, and it's not always happening on like a tidy time frame. So like I remember a few years ago, y'all remember this? It was like every other thriller book was about sugar babies for some women reason, and I was like, are these white women all right? So many sugar baby books. And this year we have so many tradwife books. So I ask again, are white women all right? Why are there so many tradwife books? But I think it's just exciting, that it is also, but when it is certain issues are just enduring enough, that's what I've learned. I write weird black speculative fiction, and it's a fear that I've just had to let go of. I'm like, I'm just going to bank on the fact that we're going to continue to have issues with this. We're going to continue to not really know how to communicate certain things, and it's going to be difficult. The other, thinking of challenges in writing a contemporary novel. So I'll Watch Your Baby is my first historical novel, and in some ways, that brings certain challenges with it. I had to learn a lot. I'm not somebody who's super interested in research. I don't want to fall down that rabbit hole and like let it kill my momentum. But one thing I really enjoyed writing a historical novel is that I didn't have to worry about technology in any way. Okay. I feel like there's such an escalation of what counts as horror. There's such audiences and appetites for blood on the page, has really escalated over the years. And when you have technology and the way that that can like solve and interfere with the story, it makes me think like, wow, it must have been so nice back in the day. You could write a book and no one had phones, no one had GPS. You don't have to create all of these other reasons why this family's trapped in the woods and has no way to communicate, with the outside world. And I think that could be so. I do think that could be an element of because now in my stories, I'm always thinking like, how do I work around this? Is this person hiking? Are they going to have cell reception? Because so many problems can just be solved with the technology and the skills that we have now. In a way that writing a historical piece, I was like, I don't even have to worry about it. It's so much more chill, from that perspective. And yeah, along with kind of the escalation in terms of the gore of appetites is something also that I think about a lot. Y'all remember when Paranormal Activity came out? And there's that one scene where it's like the door moves like a little bit. It's like a eek, and everyone's like, "Whoa, that's so scary! Did you see that? That scared the hell out of me at that time." And now I'm like, "How quaint! Just a door. Would that be scary? Would that work if it came out today?" And I don't know that it would.
No, that's a really good point, and AC inspired a follow up question for me, which you basically just dove into expertly, and that is like, how have we seen the creative lenses shift in terms of narrative, in terms of themes and characters and representation? And I think you touched on that really great, Grace. I'd love to hear your perspective on this, and if you could perhaps help answer the question whether the white women are all right or not.
Okay, so as a white woman, I'm not all right. Um,
Yeah.
I
Fair,
don't know if
fair.
I can like represent all white women, but no. Please help. Please send help. Um, but yeah, so to the question about temporary horror, contemporary horror. Woo. I really, really love all of Nina's points about technology. As you were talking, Nina, I was thinking like, wow, exactly. I've been working on my most recent work in progress, which I recently like kind of like finished my first round, and now I'm sending it to somebody to look over. Is about a evil AI sex bot. And I wrote the bulk of it in like early 2025, end of 2024. I've been doing like rounds of edits on it. And at the time, I had bought a bunch of books because, unlike Nina, I love doing research. I bought a bunch of books about AI and its current capabilities. I used to work in IT before I became disabled, so I'm really invested in it in that way. And I wrote something that was very, 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 very bang on what AI was capable of. And if we just like souped it up a little bit, like what could realistically happen and what sort of horrors could unfold based on AI's capabilities in the summer of 2024. And now we're at April 2026, and in the last 2 years, what AI does and the way that people are using it and the awareness that the average person has of it has dramatically shifted. So there's not only this concern that Nina addressed of like what issues are going to socially be relevant, but also legitimately like what technologies are going to be in use, what's going to be the capacity of those technologies, and how is the average person going to be using those technologies by the time a book comes out is a big concern in my mind when writing contemporary fiction. Another concern that I personally have when writing contemporary fiction is that as somebody who used to work in IT, I am actually very, very suspicious of technology. I don't think that a lot of it has good security. I think a lot of it, especially like an over reliance on AI, is not only poisonous to art, but also poisonous to the average person's like ability to think critically and critically problem solve and like have their own opinions and their own perspectives, because in a lot of ways being able to think is similar to building muscles. You have to do it to be able to keep that skill. And so I avoid, and when I say avoid, I mean aggressively refuse to use AI for anything at all. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And I worry, and like similarly, like I don't have a Alexa or anything that listens to me in my house. I refuse to use a lot of like modern technologies that I think aren't secure or aren't, good for my mental health. And I worry that as time progresses, it's going to be harder and harder for me to write contemporary novels because if other people are integrating these technologies into their day to day life, I'm legitimately not going to know what it's like. So I do worry about that when it comes to contemporary novels. However, there's one thing that I find so, so, so much easier when writing a contemporary novel versus writing something that's, again, usually the other genres I do will be like sci-fi or fantasy. Though I do have one novel, one manuscript that I wrote that hasn't come out that spans a large amount of time. And so it starts in the 70s and then like goes to modern day.
Mhm.
So I do have a little bit of experience writing historical. But what's really, really nice about writing something that's in like our contemporary modern world is that I don't have to world build. And all of the important cultural touch points, I can just assume my reader already knows them. I don't have to, explain what Catholicism is. I can just have a spooky painting of Jesus. I don't have to like get into, that doctors are less likely to believe reports of women's pain. Kind of people know that, people know that sexism exists. People kind of like already know that women are less likely to be believed. People already know that racism exists in our world. People know what technologies exist. People know what our houses look like. People know what a car is. Whereas if I'm writing something that's really fantastical or really sci-fi, you're having to sit there and be like, okay, how do people get around? What's the weather like in this mythical place? Do they have dogs? And so you have to start answering all these like very silly questions. Or for historical, I remember spending like 2 hours trying to figure out what did the knobs on ovens look like in the 70s? Because I had written a scene and I was like, she sets the oven to 375. And then one of my beta readers was like, I don't think that ovens worked like that in the 70s. And I was like, how how did ovens work? So I'm calling my dad being like, what was the oven like in your house when you were a kid? And so in that way I find contemporary writing a lot easier.
Yeah, that brings up another question for me though. Do you worry at all that about people's short memories? Because people do have short memories. For example, that the '70s was not that long ago. You can call your dad about it, and we've already forgotten that little piece of historical context. Now, that's not as big as like a car or whatever. Those are still largely the same. However, if you just said like a Tesla, which I did in a recent story, right? I said like a guy drove a Cybertruck. I said that knowing that that would help characterize this character, right? I very much wanted the exact thing that you think of when you think of a Cybertruck, but who's to say what that interpretation will be for an audience of the future? Will Cybertrucks even still exist? God, I hope not. But we never know. We never know. Maybe everybody will be forced to drive a Cybertruck or be executed by robot dog. It's hard to say. So, what do you guys think? Is there any risk of that kind of thing happening, or is that something you just shouldn't really worry about as an author? AC, we'll start with you.
I think it's kind of, you'll probably just send yourself spinning in circles if you worry about that kind of thing too much. I was just thinking, as you were you were saying that about, loss of context and things like that. I actually always find it kind of interesting when I come across something in a novel or any kind of work that's, not necessarily a familiar immediate context, maybe set slightly in the past. And then, I'll learn, oh, the author made this choice because it would characterize this person as, a horrible person or a good person or whatever. And it's just kind of a neat little world building thing to learn. So I kind of like when little details are in stories like that. I think, trusting the reader, trusting the viewer. I think people are also kind of good at like, filtering out the details that aren't interesting to them. So if, somebody in the future comes across a Cybertruck and it doesn't sort of like, and that's not a common thing anymore that people remember existed. They might just, glide past it and go on to the next thing, or it might pique their curiosity of like, oh, what was this thing? And look it up and discover this whole sort of, history that was unknown to them. And I think that's kind of the beauty of these things is people can kind of like choose their own adventure and dive deeper into things. I mean, especially with a lot of ebooks or people who read, exclusively ebook. I mean, who knows if that's going to be a thing in the future, but I know at least certain ones of them actually kind of like, let you look up things right on the spot or that kind of thing. So you can kind of glide in and out of like, oh, I don't understand this context. I can find out right away and then go right back to reading, which is kind of cool. Or, you can jump out of your physical book and go look it up elsewhere.
I always include a full list of resources for people that want to look up ovens from the 70s, all the different parts, all the different knobs and settings, because nothing will take me out of a historical novel more than oven settings. So you're doing the Lord's
Same.
work.
Same. Yeah, I'm right out. I need those Danielewski style footnotes or I'm all the way out of that story. But yeah, what do you think, Neena, Grace, and how do you work around that if you do worry about it? Like, I would also say, just given the Cybertruck example, right? That's not the only indication that that character is a douche. So it's okay. Like, there's the point will still get across. But yeah, what do y'all think? Grace, what do you think?
If I am lucky enough for somebody to read The Scald Crow in 20 years and they don't understand a timely reference, man, I'm going to be so happy. Like, what a good problem to have,
Right.
I'm going to really enjoy it. And so I guess partly I don't worry about that one too much just because I would feel so lucky to have that problem. That it's not something I actively worry about. That being said, I also think there's like a value to it because when I read books that are written about like a different culture or a different perspective or or whatever from mine, especially when it's like a perspective character who's wildly different from me, those details and those aspects that I don't know anything about, even in contemporary where it's not like world building, but including things like that is so specific, making sure that the oven dial is just right is good world building, for lack of a better term. If I just glide past it, then okay, I've lost something, but it gives me the opportunity to like kind of open a door or maybe clues me in on how little I know about this perspective or this world that I'm entering. And so I almost think, and this is a very personal opinion, of course, and I could see somebody arguing the exact opposite of this point and making good points. So I'm not saying I'm objectively correct here, but I almost think that you would lose something by trying too hard to future proof your work, because making sure that you are set in a particular place and making sure that you're really like encapsulating a experience and a place and a moment in time and a person and a perspective, that richness I think could be lost.
I think that's a really good point. There's so many good, for example, sci-fi novels and stories, and they've been adapted into movies and stuff that, the story holds up really well thematically against the backdrop of modern politics and AI and everything like that. But then you see like the computers and stuff, and they still have like knobs and buttons, and you're like, y'all didn't have any idea the touch screen was coming like it was coming. And that always makes me kind of laugh. Like when I watch Alien, the original Alien, I'm like, yeah, that's not what it looks like even now. So it definitely would have been what Weyland Yutani was rolling out on their intergalactic space fleet. But Nina, what do you think?
It's a great example of your point, Clay, which is it's not just a classic. Alien is timeless.
Right.
Even as our technology changes, monitors and things like that become radically different and spacesuits and helmets and all the things that we've grown more accustomed to as time goes on. We watch Alien for the characters and the atmosphere and the plot and the intrigue, and it's future proof, absolutely, because it's bigger than the details of the helmet and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Nina, any final thoughts on this?
I think that Grace has really clean edges and a really clean point here. I think I also agree that these details are just so key to really pinning these characters in a particular place. And a contemporary novel that is really nailing that sense of place and time. If you're reading it, you're like, this feels like early 2000s. I'm in the long t-shirt. Everybody's booty cheeks are like a little bit out, you know, and everyone's sitting. I'm like, wow, they did a great job. I think so many of these details are also, they do endure the test of time. I mean, your character is driving a Cybertruck. His dad maybe is driving a Studebaker. His dad's dad is driving, I don't know that many cars. Don't make me keep doing this, but you get the point. And I think that I think one of the most amazing things about fiction, any kind of fiction, is regardless of what time it's set in, we all experience the world in a really different way. I mean, there are so many different kinds of life experiences that are happening parallel to mine that I don't know anything about. I learned that this week because I won't tell y'all all the details, but just know I came to talk to some friends of mine about an incident that came up with lab created urine. And I was telling her, I'm like, that's crazy. And then today in 2026, these kids, they could just run out and buy fake urine for all their fake urine needs, which are many. Okay. They're many, many
Hmm.
reasons you might need a bag of fake urine. And I'm like, but when I was a little girl, my relatives would just ask me to pee in a jar and then leave it in the bathroom. And then they would take that with them. And they were like, what are they doing with the urine? And also, you make urine in a lab. And what are all these details of what's happening? And that's when I realized, oh, we're really not from the same place. We are the same age. We live geographically in the same place right now. But even those details would be completely unfamiliar and would require lots of explanation if you're not from that particular place. And so that's why I think, I want to know about the Cybertruck. I want to know that this character is from the kind of household where her mom was slicking Vaseline all over her face before she goes to bed. I want to know that this character is wearing Timberlands or if he's wearing like the off-brand Timberlands that he got from the Ross Dress for Less. These
Hmm.
details, I think are really just so necessary for creating that picture in time. And like Grace said, I mean, it would just be a wonderful problem to have to know that our work is so enduring that somebody 20 years from now will pick it up and that person will then have to look up what did people use Vaseline for? And also they'll be like, we don't need, lab created urine because we have better future urine now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Future urine's going to be great for sure.
I agree.
Two things. I love your point about the urine. That's hilarious. Do y'all remember? I don't know if y'all smoked weed as a kid, but I certainly tried to. And I had to roll weed. I had to roll up little dryer sheets and shove them in an empty toilet paper roll and try to blow the weed through that to kill the smell. And now kids can just like go get a weed pen and it smells like Fruit Loops and just hit that thing in a target. It's crazy. It's
They're so
crazy the way things have
spoiled.
changed.
So spoiled.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they don't even now, now they can just get that urine for free. It's all good. Good for you kids. Live your best lives out there.
Clay had to smoke a joint in the snow, uphill, both ways
I did.
when he was
I did.
going to
Jeff.
school.
I did have to do that. Absolutely. Winter was the best time because those scents don't stick to you quite as badly in the cold weather. But um second thing, I think you all bring up an excellent point, which is like a good story that's layered with those details that sort of help flesh out the character through action and detail, like what they wear, what they drive, etc. Those are great ways to dive deeper or dive as deeply as you want into a story that you love. And that's something that good stories can do for us in the contemporary realm. So I love that. Jeff, if you have any closing thoughts on this topic, please give them to us. Otherwise, why don't you lead us into our next question?
Well, I have sort of a side bag question, and that is pertaining to the novel, because that's what we're here to talk about today. Some of the authors mentioned that maybe we've gotten inured to gore and blood and things like that. But I will also say that in a short story or even a novella, you can be much more ruthless with your characters. The stakes can be higher and the time frames can be shorter. When you write a novel, obviously you've got to toy with your food and keep some of these characters alive much longer. What are some of the challenges about writing novel length and horror, which usually involves some kind of physical or psychological peril?
This is something that is one of the reasons why I like writing long form actually more than I like writing short stories, is because especially in the horror genre, I know that I am considered correctly. This is not me calling anybody out. But I know that I'm like considered like kind of light. Partly because as I say, I always do kind of like this comedy piece. But also because I'm not super duper like splatter punky. I'm not like way over the top like kills. There isn't a single on page kill in the Scald Crow. And a lot of the horror is like there's gross stuff. As I say, I always write about disability. And so there is body horror that's related to the disability. There's like weird, like gross body parts that pop up. There's like gross, like stuff that happens with like, like meat and trash and things like that. But as far as horror goes, my horror is relatively low in terms of like gore, kill count, things like that. But I actually that's because I'm a coward. I always joke that there are two type of horror writers. There are the ones who, like more blood, more guts, more kills, like up that ante, which is pretty common these days. And then there are the horror writers and the horror creators who are scared of absolutely everything and therefore good at making small things scary. So when I was like in my early 20s, I think I was like 20, maybe 21, I remember being at a party and somebody putting Cabin in the Woods on and me getting so upset by the scene where like one of the zombie redneck torture zombies like shoves a hook into a girl's back. I locked myself in the bathroom and I cried, man. I'm a wimp. And so what's really beautiful about being a wimp is that since everything scares me, I can make anything really scary. So, is the door moving in Paranormal Activity hitting audiences the same way as it did? I mean, who can say for sure? But like I'd say, I think it holds up and I think these things hold up. Because if the audience is engaging in good faith and is there for a story and is there for emotional resonance and is there for connection, they're going to be searching for that connection and they're going to be looking for it and they're going to be, wanting to connect. If somebody goes into one of my horror novels and they're looking for like a big bloodbath, I don't know what to tell you other than they poorly researched their choice of entertainment. um, and so I don't think it's necessary. And also I think there are people for that. There are people who are doing like the upping the ante like forever, forever, forever. And for those people who really want that, they can go find those creators. But I don't think there's a need for every creator to be playing that flavor of the game.
Yeah, one thing I think about in terms of long versus short fiction is the idea of sort of like sustaining tension in order to be effective. I feel like, you can have sort of that, like the single, short shock within short fiction and it doesn't get lost within anything else. But with a longer form piece, I do think you want to kind of like break up the horror or trying to break up the tension in different ways, whether it's with character moments or whether if it's just, a quiet moment that, lets the reader catch their breath a little bit. Because I think, if it's constantly up, 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 or, just constant horror on the page, there's kind of a risk of getting a little numb to it and it is less effective. I mean, that may be your mileage may vary, but that's just sort of, my personal tastes as a reader or a viewer, where if it is too relentless and there's never a moment to breathe or there's never sort of a counterbalance that breaks the tension or breaks the horror, then you almost sort of like shut down a little bit or you get too used to it and it becomes less effective. So I think, you definitely have to think about that a little bit more with longer pieces versus shorter pieces.
Yeah, this might be a little controversial. I also prefer longer form to short stories. There's an abruptness to short stories that I've never really gotten down with. It's like just when it starts getting good, it's like, and now it's over. I'm like, what? It's over. But we were just getting warmed up, baby. What's going on? And that's why, Clay, I respect you so much. You're like a short story king, and I aspire to be like that. I'm trying. I'm educating myself. I'm trying to acquire the taste. I'm writing out more short stories. But I just really love having that longer runway. I love the build of a longer form novel. I love the feasts when I'm reading it or writing it. I love just having that space. Like Allison suggested to kind of break it up. If y'all can't tell, I'm like 80% of just a joke of an individual. So my work also has a lot of comedy in it, which could be hard to do when you have to when page space is at such a premium. And I think it's wonderful, that we live in a world where there are so many different kinds of fear. I think my job and what inspires me as a horror writer is that every character, we don't have the same nightmares. There's an exact
Mhm.
worst case scenario that's going to be different from person to person. Like thinking about the worst fear that our parents collectively can think of, what nightmares are keeping them up at night. It's going to be different than your worst particular fear. And like if you're introduced to a character on page one and all you know about him is like, this is Clay, and y'all all you need to know about Clay is he's afraid of drowning. The reader's waiting. You're like, all I know for sure is he's definitely getting airdropped into some body of water. Then we're like, and why is he so afraid of drowning? What does drowning represent to Clay? What does this all look like? I love I like exploring not a fear that's general to everyone, but the particular fear of that particular character and what does that relatability factor look like? And so it's going to be very heavily influenced by circumstance and who they are. Um, but yeah, I really think of writing horror as, for me, it's like I'm writing a character in really the worst day of their life. And as the reader, you just know that it's gonna get worse, and worse and worse, but you're not necessarily sure as we turn that dial, in what ways the situation's going to descend. But if the character works really hard, there might be, in my books at least, there's might be a sliver of a chance that they might be able to come out at the end, but they're gonna have to like really scrape off a few layers of skin and soul if they want to like survive the experience. And so that's the horror that really excites me. It really comes down to the interpersonal dynamics and the diversity of the fear experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, very quickly. I just wanted to add to Nina's point. Yeah, about specific fears and different characters having specific fears. I do worry sometimes that in like the pursuit of ever increasing gore, or ever increasing kill counts, or more and more ridiculous kills, we forget that like physical pain and death are not the worst things
Hmm.
that can happen.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Yeah, I agree. I would argue, I mean, for me, I'm like psychological sources of psychological fear are the worst. Like if you're asking me like what am I most afraid of happening right now? It's not like necessarily a physical pain that's happening to my body.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think just as much as we've seen a lot of ratcheting up the gore, I personally think we're in a period of pushing more for psychological horror, and I think it goes through phases. But if you look at, like, even Sinners, for example, I mean, that has a bit of blood and gore for sure, it's a vampire film, but at the end of the day, it's an analysis of colonialism and a breakdown of the American myth, and it's way more about all that kind of stuff than it is about the blood and the gore at the end of the day. And you see the same thing with films like Weapons. I think does a pretty good job of that. Again, those both have gory climaxes and stuff, which is still relatively common in horror, but there's a lot of psychological stuff happening. I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but maybe I read too many short stories for Nightmare Magazine, which is a very psychological place to live, especially right now in this submission period. Jeff, what do you think about all that?
There's also power in the small scale. Someone was saying to me in an interview that they know what it's like to get a paper cut. They don't know what it's like to get chopped up with a chainsaw.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a chainsaw is scary and it's graphic and gory. I might wince and be like, oh, that's bad. But if you have a 1-page description of someone stepping on a nail and then hobbling around, forget the guy with the chainsaw. The thing that's going to stick with me is something small that I can relate to. And especially Grace and Neena, when you bring issues of your own life and your own struggles into a story, you can expose nerves that most people don't even know are targets. When you talk about, are women being believed in a medical context? Or, Neena, what you were saying about your own peers may not understand some of the barriers with like drug testing for certain jobs and things like that. Those are all ways that you can antagonize your characters and expose them to physical and psychological harm that you wouldn't get just, with a chainsaw. Chainsaws don't discriminate, and so they're not as fun.
I think that's a great point, Jeff. Great point. I will say, of all the like grisly murders in movies, like nothing will freak me out more than somebody at the cutting board chopping vegetables, because I'm like, I have done that. I've cut my finger real bad working in a kitchen, and you're right. Like that makes me squirm more than like somebody getting ran through like a wood chipper or whatever. Literally makes me squirm because I know what that feels like. Scarier.
Before we go on to the next question, I just want to say I do wonder if it's true that chainsaws don't discriminate. Because why, if chainsaws don't discriminate, how do we have such a long span of time with the trope of the black guy during first? And let's not also forget to pour one out for the other often first murder, which is the precious hoe. Okay, many hoes have lost their lives in the
Yes, they
woods,
have.
Katie's out. Let's respect them. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for that respect. Clearly, there is discrimination happening here.
That's true. That's true. Very true.
Don't blame that on
Um,
chainsaws. Chainsaws did nothing wrong. It's people
Right.
with chainsaws that we need to interrogate.
Chainsaws don't kill people. People with chainsaws.
That's right. My second question, what are some key factors that contribute to a novel standing out in the contemporary horror market? What are some that you feel are unique to your book, which shine a grisly blood-streaked light upon it?
Do you want to start with that one? What are some things that make a novel stand out in the contemporary horror market? And what are some things that you think contributed to your story's nomination and success that make it unique?
I don't know. It's always such a tough question to answer because, so much is subjective. And I feel like even more so in horror, it's kind of like the saying about comedy. It's like, I don't really know, but I know, or maybe it's the saying about pornography. I don't know. I don't know, but I know it when I see it kind of thing. I find, comedic taste very hard to pin down, horror taste very hard to pin down, and maybe pornographic taste very hard to pin down. But to bring it back to horror, it's so hard to know like what's going to scare people or what's going to hook people. Like, kind of, what Grace was saying before about how being scared of a lot of things, you're able to make anything scary, which is great. And when I'm sitting down to write something, I don't know what's kind of sort of resonate with someone else. So it almost feels like a little bit luck of the draw. I mean, I know the kind of things that draw me as a reader, and it does tend to be that more sort of psychological horror that has sort of that the creeping feeling that gets under your skin that isn't just necessarily blood thrown at a screen that makes it stand out, or something like Sinners that you were talking about earlier, where really the supernatural horror element doesn't really show up until the last third of the movie, really. And before that, it is more psychological, sociological, society, and to me that kind of makes it stand out, as opposed to like, oh, we've kind of seen this like endless slasher reboot before. Not that slasher reboots aren't fun, but it's like you kind of know what you're getting with the next Scream movie, you know what you're getting with the next Final Destination movie, and then something that's doing something a little bit different that isn't chainsaws from the get-go, it's going to stand out. which I think you get with both Weapons and Sinners, and the same thing with horror novels, something that isn't necessarily kind of just like what you've seen before.
Yeah, I agree with Allison. I think, I mean, the reading experience is just so completely subjective. There are so many books where I'm like, this book deeply moved me. I loved it. And then I looked on Goodreads and everyone's like, 2 stars. I hated it. And I probably hate anybody who likes it too. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. And so it's really hard to put your finger on, one thing that's going to, move a large number of people. I think the books that really endure in our memories are ones that happen to, whether by happenstance or, by planning and just a really sharp eye. There are certain books that just feel very topical to the moment and that like just really endure that test of time as being linked with certain cultural events. I remember when I read this isn't a horror novel, although it is a horror novel to me, when, Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give came out, and it just really skewered just such a exact moment that is still like regularly occurring, but it really just was such a book of that moment that I don't know that I can take away my reading experience from like the news that I was reading at that time. But when it comes to Listen to Your Sister, my debut novel is a, speculative horror novel that's about three siblings. The eldest sibling, Kala, is really struggling after becoming the guardian to her teenage brother, Jamie. And when Jamie's, teenage recklessness goes too far, they end up on the run to a remote cabin in the woods, which is a super great choice that we should all do when times get tough in our daily lives. And well, first I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who nominated Listen to Your Sister. It's just been really moving to me to know that my book was able to touch anybody. And so to see the notes that I'm getting in my inbox about Listen to Your Sister and the parts that are really striking a chord with people has been really one of the most incredible moments of my life. So thank y'all so much. Neena for president. But the part specifically that I'm hearing from folks that they're like this made this book sticky to them was Listen to Your Sister specifically is really around the fear of like a parentified sibling, which kind of hit that moment of like a lot of people feel this way as caretakers in their families, especially eldest sisters. Y'all, there are so many eldest sisters in my inbox. They're baddies. They're tough as hell. They're maybe unionizing. I don't know, but we do so much labor that is unpaid, that is tedious everyday work. It's not like a glamorous work. We really center our families, our communities, our workplaces, and you really get very little gratitude in return. And so that particular element of Listen to Your Sister, of my titular character, Kala, the things she was willing to do for her family, and in turn, the frustrations that she had around that, the loneliness of like guardianship as compared to like somebody who formed a family in the more traditional way. This was definitely a topic that's really close to my heart because, of course, it's partially inspired by my own experience of suddenly becoming a guardian to my teenage brother. And so, Listen to Your Sister. I mean, I hear a lot from folks of like what made people want to talk about it in some form was just the way that it demonstrated the complexity of the sibling relationship. This really specific feeling of like, wow, I love you so much. I love you so, so much that I could maybe die for you, but also sometimes I want to punt your ass all the way into space, like get all the way out of here, go into a dumpster, and the way that we can at turns be so loving and so cruel towards the people that are closest to us. And I think that definitely struck a chord, particularly with, yeah, the elder sisters and our families and so many families who are just doing so much labor behind the scenes to keep things spinning.
Yeah, and I will say you did a fantastic job with that. My favorite scene in that book is when Kala finally like snaps at both of her brothers at the cabin, and the whole time her brother's just like dancing around all high, and it's just like yes, it's so perfect. Grace, how about you?
As far as what makes a contemporary horror novel like really stick out, again, obviously, I'm speaking from a super opinionated place, and I have no no data backing this up. But I think in like our modern contemporary society, people feel very lonely and very siloed. There are millions and millions of opportunities for connection that we all encounter every day, scrolling through social media and like the constant barrage of like advertisements and just the inescapable kind of like ocean of like just news and bad news and just everything that's happening. We're constantly getting barraged by all this information. And in theory, we could use that to connect. In theory, we could use social media to, to like organize and whatnot. But ultimately, what ends up happening is it seems like the vast majority of people I know and the vast majority of people I come into contact with are just so overloaded and so overwhelmed and ultimately just feeling so isolated and so lonely because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy to really be able to build and have and maintain a community. And that's, bad for these like large capitalistic businesses. And so there's not a lot of motivation in late stage capitalism for the people who really have power and who have money to encourage us to like reduce our isolation and to become increasingly connected to one another. So we're getting dissuaded from that. And so I think from what I've been seeing for contemporary horror novels and contemporary novels in general, when they're really successful and when they really get popular, I feel like they're doing a very good job of connecting emotionally with the reader and really resonating with the reader in some way. Because for that moment, the reader is feeling connected and feeling like they're in a conversation with the author and feels like they're a part of something and feels very, very, invested. And, if done well, like, hopefully the reader feels seen. And so I think that a lot of what's making contemporary novels very successful isn't a super intricate plot. It's not a particularly compelling twist. It's not a super gory scene. It's not incredible world building. It's not this, that, or the other thing. It's being able to really deeply connect with the story, with the character, and with what's going on, and just getting that feeling of connection. And so I do think that that's in our modern times what people are really hungry for and what's really helping books be successful. That was at least really what I was trying to do with Scald Crow, and is really what I'm trying to do with all of the writing. I care much more about connecting with my readers than I care about being highbrow, seeming educated, seeming fancy, seeming genius, seeming anything. I really, really care about kind of like reaching my hand out and grabbing the reader's palm and connecting with them. It's particularly important to me because, as I said, I'm invisibly disabled. I have a lot of physical health problems, and it's very, very easy for disabled people to be forgotten, not only in fiction but in broader society. So you can turn that loneliness knob just all the way up when it comes to disabled folks. There's not a lot of disabled characters out there. When there are disabled characters, they're frequently, murdered right away for sympathy, or their disability is somehow a sign that they're secretly evil, or, a sign of wretchedness, or like, pick your favorite disabled stereotype. There's lots of them. And so I think a lot of the success of Scald Crow comes from the fact that I have this disabled main character, and she's invisibly disabled and she has chronic pain. And there aren't a lot of stories with disabled main characters who are experiencing chronic pain. So right there's a big opportunity for me to connect with readers who are disabled, or for readers who have, disabled loved ones and who want to know more about that experience. And so right away, there's an opportunity there with Skull Crow. And I think that that has something to do with my nomination. Another thing, though, that I did in Scald Crow, that I think contributed to the success, but also contributes to every bad review it has, is that besides horror, I read lots of different genres. I'm kind of genre agnostic. I read all sorts of things, and I do read a decent amount of like romance and contemporary romance. And contemporary romance novels are written in, almost always like first person. There's usually like your main character has lots of like snappy little asides. They, move at a particular clip. And they're designed in such a way because, it's romance, it's erotica. You're supposed to really like connect and feel connected to that main character. And I don't want to say that Scald Crow is written like a romance novel because there is kind of more depth to it. And obviously it's not a romance novel, but I did steal some of my inspiration from the style of contemporary romance novels, where it is first person. The focus really is on the emotional experience of that main character. You really get like a taste of her voice, of her little asides. You're very like vulnerably inside her and like feeling her want and feeling her desire. And I think a lot of other genres outside of romance don't do that as much. And I include horror in that because it does feel pretty lowbrow to do that. And it does have this like kind of like romance feel to it. But I was really happy with that choice with Scald Crow, and I think I'm gonna keep making that choice because again, if I'm searching for connection, if I'm looking to like give a connection with the reader, it's a really good way to do it. So a lot of the times when people say that the writing of Scald Crow is like particularly unique or they haven't seen something like that before, it's because they haven't read a romance novel.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that crossover has a lot of natural relevancy because
Mhm.
you can't be afraid for a character that you don't care about. So those deep
Exactly.
personal connections, and like you're saying, the being seen, I think that is a huge contributor. And we're seeing a lot of that with new voices and perspectives. The gates are been flung open for the horror genre, at least, for a lot of new voices and perspectives to enter the fold, and I think that's a great thing. There's a reason that it's been so popular, all this new influx of horror voices, and I love that. I do think that's a huge reason for the success. AC, I don't believe we got exactly a summary of your book or what you think maybe helped it stand out, but if you want to give that to us, we would love to hear it.
Well, my piece is actually a novelette that was,
Novelette, yeah.
yeah. And I feel like I wish I knew. It's one of those things that, like, I'm always chasing. It's like, what made that piece work? Whereas, like, nobody sort of noticed this one over there. And I've never been able to pin
Mhm.
that down for myself. But I'm really delighted that people did like it, that it did connect with people. And, I wish I knew both what it was and how to recreate it.
Can you give our readers a summary of the story, and maybe we can entice them to go read it for themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of got like a folk horror-y, but also slasher vibe. Sort of, what if deer were prom horror queens and very terrible cosmic horror things happen? So it is sort of a little bit of genre mashing, which might be part of it. Again, like as a consumer of fiction, I always like when sort of things play between the genre
Mhm.
lines. Yeah, and I mean, I do think there is sort of that, it is hopefully rooted in character and sort of rooted in, the main character's experience, and hopefully offers kind of that moment of connection where you sort of really, um, you know, feel what she's going through, that she has kind of this, family legacy and family weight kind of put on her, and feeling like she has to protect other people while just kind of trying to figure out her own life, and sort of witnessing something really horrific, and but trying to figure out a way to kind of keep going through the trauma, and sort of not give in to like the urge to fight violence with violence, I guess.
Yeah, well, speaking of something relevant to contemporary times, I think we can all relate to that. That's definitely a feeling we're all struggling with. I was going to make this two questions, but let's just make it one. Can you name a contemporary horror novel from the last 5 years or so that really stood out to you, and what made it special from the other novels around it, both from a writer and a reader perspective? So, is there something that you, as a writer, really love about it and are kind of like hope to emulate or admire in your own work? And then just as a reader and a consumer, what do you love about it? And then maybe one more novel in this second category, which is something that was eligible to be nominated for this year's Stoker Awards, but was not nominated. So you'd still like to shine a light on it. Now, this is, of course, not to disparage in any way everything that was nominated. All the books nominated are fantastic. We have read through them all, but there's hundreds and hundreds of books out there, right? So shine a light on another book that you just love, that didn't get the spotlight this year, but that still deserves lots of readerships and eyes, and lovely horror folks drooling over it just like we are. So, again, a favorite horror book from the last 5 years or so that really stood out to you as both a reader or writer, and then something from last year that didn't get nominated but still deserves to be read by thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Grace, I saw you sprinting to your bookshelf, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure did. Okay. So first, things that came out recently in the last couple years that I love, but weren't necessarily last year. So the first one I want to draw attention to is Tender by Beth Hetland. This is a graphic novel, and it, I believe, actually was nominated for a Stoker for its year when it came out. But this is my favorite horror graphic novel I've ever read. It is a contemporary horror. It's set in Chicago and very clearly set in Chicago. And like all my Chicagoland local, babes will immediately, recognize its sense of place. It is a psychological horror with body horror elements as well, and it is incredibly done because usually when I read a horror novel and like your kind of like perspective main character is like deeply unwell and is the source of the horror themselves, usually I end up kind of hating those books because I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, and I'm struggling to come up with a nice way to say it, but I just kind of don't care about self-obsessed mean people doing mean things. I just don't care. What's really beautiful about Tender is that your main character is definitely a self-obsessed, manipulative, like kind of like objectively bad person. And yet it's this just so beautifully done and so beautifully executed that it's very emotive. You feel like kind of this deep connection to this main character, even as you're repulsed. And so you feel this incredible desire to both lean in and lean away. And it's just really incredibly done. And I haven't encountered like that level of push and pull in a character before as I have in this book. So Tender by Beth Hetland. Great. 10 out of 10. This is The Nut House by Patrick Barb. It's technically a novella. And sorry, I'm clumsy. But besides being clumsy, so Patrick Barb has been kind of a long time favorite of mine in the indie horror scene. I like his writing a lot, again, because you feel a lot of connection to the characters, and he does a really good job of writing not only horror that feels like capital H horror, but also you do feel like a degree of like tenderness and heartwarming feelings with it, which makes it all the more effective when he kind of like rips your heart out of your chest and squishes it in the palm of his hand. So, high praise for Patrick Barb there. This one though is particularly fun because I'm not a huge cosmic horror person, but this cosmic horror is amazing. It is a cosmic horror where all the main characters are squirrels. One of the main characters is but all the main characters are squirrels, and a lot of the cosmic horror comes from them like breaking into a human house that's like a hoarder house. And so it's really cool because it's a cosmic horror, but you, the human reading it, has a deeper understanding of what's going on than the characters do. And so it's really cool. It's like reading H.P. Lovecraft, except you're Cthulhu. So love this one. It's really cool. It hasn't gotten nearly as much like, like clout as I think it deserves. And then one that would have been up for Stoker's this year but didn't make it. Lauren Bolger is another one of my favorites in the indie horror scene. This just came out in 2025, I think in October. The Bar Incidents. This is her second novel. Her first one was called Kill Radio. And The Bar Incidents is super cool because she did a it's like a folklore horror in a lot of ways. But she did something really interesting, which is she combined multiple sources of folklore together to create the plot. And it's in a way that you wouldn't think works because she talks about Jewish folklore and the afterlife. She talks about Viking folklore. And I believe she's also talking a lot about like like folklore that's like local to like Vermont and like that area. And there are also found footage elements in it. And what's really neat about that is all of those different folklores, instead of just being like disparate things, she brings them all together to form the basis plot of the novel and the beats of the novel. And I've just never seen anybody do that with folklore before. And what it ends up feeling like is like the American novel. Because, America, the great melting pot, blah, 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 whatever. But I feel like you do, find this in American culture. And all cultures do this to some degree, but in American culture, you see this a lot. Where you see these different disparate, sources of, like folklore and history and family history that just all kind of get like smooshed together. We all probably have an experience of having like a friend who's like, dad is Jewish and their mom's Christian and they celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas, or something similar to that effect. And like this is that phenomenon dialed up to 11 in horror book form, and I loved it.
Okay, Grace, when are you going to start your own podcast? Because your book recommendations are fantastic.
Absolutely. We will put.
You gotta hype me up like that for next time, okay? Let's have a chat offline.
Yeah.
Grace will send you her Venmo after.
Everyone's hiring Grace as their publicist now. AC, what about you?
I feel like I should have come prepared with show and tell, despite the, stack of books next to me. None of the ones there are the ones that I wanted to talk about, but um, these might be a cheat because I do feel like there are two that did get recognition and rightly so. But I do have two also to talk about, and I'll try to be quick about both. That I feel like didn't get as much love from last year specifically. But the two that first came to my mind with the question was The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, which is a finalist this year. And then The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, which I think was a finalist in its year and may have actually won.
It won.
It did win, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
again,
that's a
rightly
phenomenal
so.
book.
And I feel like both have that like very deep sense of history they draw on, kind of real world horrors, but they also do have, that strength in characters that are, incredibly, sort of relatable and sort of draw you in, and you want to follow these characters through the story. And they're both sort of, not reinventing the horror genre, but kind of like, putting a fresh spin on. Everybody always says, oh, the vampire story is done. Like we've seen too many vampire stories, and then this one comes along and it's brilliant and it does new things with it and it takes it in a different direction. Similarly, Ghost Story. No, we've seen enough ghost stories, but you never have because you haven't seen that ghost story written by, that specific author before. Um, and again, they both did, brilliant, wonderful things with, genres that, or subgenres, I suppose, that, people keep saying are played out, but they never actually are. And then the other two that I wanted to talk about that were eligible for this year, that I wish had gotten more love. Caitlin Starling's The Graceview Patient, which is an excellent body horror that kind of deals with the horrors of the modern medical industry and kind of going back to some stuff we were talking about earlier about, patients not being believed, almost kind of being gaslit by, their supposed caretakers or the people in the hospital industry that they're supposed to trust. So basically, the main character has this sort of very rare condition and is undergoing this experimental treatment. And it feels to her like it's just making everything worse. And people keep telling her, trust the process. You have to go through this. Um, you know, this is all normal, that kind of thing. And really, it's, that sort of the horror of kind of feeling helpless, of feeling both trapped within, a failing body, but also feeling kind of trapped within a system, and keeping having your own sort of sense of reality undermined by these people who have more power in the situation than you do. That I thought was, sort of very, very effectively done. It's in a way sort of, mundane horror in that it isn't necessarily supernatural, but it is incredibly scary and it is incredibly effective.
Hmm.
Um, And then the other one that I've really, really loved from last year, which I guess you could maybe make the argument it's as much dark fantasy as horror. It is secondary world, but the works of Vermin by Hiran Ennis, uh, which just does really amazing things in terms of its world building. Definitely a horror element, definitely feels kind of like a cosmic horror element as well, but it is secondary world. Um, and it just does sort of does wonderful things with building that world, with the voice of the characters, with the way it sort of, you know, basically expects the reader to keep up with certain things. And I'm trying not to say too much to, spoil anything, but it's one of those novels that doesn't hold your hand, that doesn't feel like it needs to stop and explain things, but it just sort of throws you in, immerses you, and it's like, all right, get with the program. And it just feels, really, really brilliantly done. And I hope that more people find it as time goes on and read it and enjoy it.
Thank you. Yeah, great recommendations.
So as a reader, until becoming a debut author myself, I really don't have a concept of like time. So the question of like novels in the last 5 years is difficult for me because I only ever picked on premise. I'm like, it's vampires on a boat. Let's do it. It's black women going hiking in the woods. There. It's really just like what tropes were at play that made me want to read it. I didn't really have a sense of why it's important to support a debut author specifically, or like the importance of like pre-orders, or why certain authors might need a little more elbow grease right on that ground floor level. And so these last few months, though, I was like, okay, I'm going to make it a point to read a lot of debut fiction in a way that I've never been intentional about before. And so a clear standout for me is Alison Mick's Humboldt Cut, which is a spectacular read. It's about a Black woman who, after her grandmother dies, she returns to her hometown for the funeral and steps back into kind of a family drama in progress. It's an eco horror. It's kind of funny in a way that makes you, the reader, think that you might also want to buy like the author 5 drinks and hang out with her at the bar, and that you would have like a really good time doing that, you know. Well, I want to read it and then message her like, we should also hang out. Plus, I loved it. It's like that kind of book. And yeah, I don't know. I just really loved the characters and the family that is set in like the eco horror was just really spectacularly done to me. For me, I live a house on 5 acres, so I do straight up live in the woods. I'm not like a natural outdoor person, but I'm trying to be an outdoor person. Okay, I'm trying to get my outdoor energy up. But while I was reading this book, I'm like taking my dog out for a walk, and I'm suspicious. I'm like, I like the cut of that tree now. It's suspicious. The diversity of sounds of the forest that before felt benign. Now I'm like, mm-mm, mm-mm. And Alison Mick did that to me. And so that's why y'all should read the book. And as for books that came out in 2025 that I want to recommend, I'm going to go with Alex Grecian's book. It was The Rose of Jericho, which came out last year, which is a sequel to Red Rabbit. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar. Um, I had a chance to meet him at a few panels last year, and he was a completely lovely and humorous individual who's like into spiders. I'm like, all right. But of course, once I meet somebody, I go and I get their books right away, and I'm like, now I want to know everything about them and everything they've ever written. This is how I'm gonna live my life. But I didn't start those books right away, and then time kind of got away from me, and then I got like hit with some health issues and just some life things that were really demoralizing. And I think, like a lot of people, I read out of entertainment, but I also love to read to escape my problems and avoid processing things. And so while I'm laid up in bed trying to recover, just my energy is so low. I was like, oh, right, I meant to read Red Rabbit. I met that lovely author, and this is the time. I'm gonna do it now. And I was just completely swept away. It is just, yeah, this sweeping Western supernatural horror novel. His writing is chilling. It's atmospheric. He has this huge, quirky ensemble cast that get into all kinds of chilling shenanigans. So right after that, because I had both of them, I was able just to hop to the other dusty side of my nightstand and, grab The Rose of Jericho, which did come out last year. And I was just swept away again, getting to reunite with some of these characters. And just the scale of what he accomplished in that duology was just really spectacular. And it did, for me, what I think a lot of books, hopefully, we all have certain books in our hearts that are special to us for this reason. Where at a time when I was just like really demoralized, this was a book that I was really able to just sink into and just get completely carried away and forget about things like my credit score. What needs to worry about that? Okay, because I'm without excretion right now, y'all. you know, and just like completely just get swept away by him and the characters. And then when I surfaced, I just felt so much better. I just, felt that zest back. I was ready to, I'm not running. The cardio's still poor after the health issues, but at least in a headspace to consider, doing anything. And so I think that's just such a great gift for an author to give a reader.
Absolutely. Well said. There's so much good fiction out there. Jeff, what do you want to contribute to Everybody's Probably Too Tall TBR?
Yeah, I was looking through some of my favorites and then I was like, uh-oh, I think these were all nominated or they won Stokers. I was going to shout out Sophia Ajram's Coup de Grace, which was my favorite book of that year, but it ended up winning a Stoker. You should already own that one. Another one I want to toss out is I Can Fix Her by Ray Wild. This is my ARC copy, so the cover looks a little different. It is a novella about a woman who encounters her ex-girlfriend that she was completely obsessed with and is now totally over and is not obsessed anymore. Don't worry. Oh God. What follows is 7 harrowing days of a relationship rekindled that literally breaks reality. It is challenging and it is surreal. It's like unlike anything I read that year. I'll also shout out Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, which is a favorite book of mine from a year before or two ago, which is about a woman confined to a wheelchair who is struggling with postpartum depression. She and her husband win a lottery to get a spot in an exclusive high-rise in New York. And they think it is the stroke of luck that is finally going to turn their fortunes around, and it ends up being the beginning of a nightmare. It's packed with surprises. It's one of the best written examples of isolation in the middle of a modern major city. I would highly recommend Nestlings to everyone.
Yeah, I love Nestlings too. All the recommendations y'all have given resonated with me as well. The ones that I have read, particularly The Reformatory, that book blew my mind. And every time I read Tananarive, I'm like, so George Martin in Dream Songs, his collection of short stories / autobiography. It's great if you like George Martin, because it is a collection of his early short stories, and then in between he does these autobiographical pieces about his life as a writer, and he kind of like walks you through his life with the stories. It's pretty cool. But he has a quote in there where there's 3 types of writers that will help young writers develop, and it's first, there's the writers you will read and you'll be like, if this got published, I think my writing can get published. Um, that's one you need. The second one is, I hope I can write like this someday. I believe that I will be able to get to that place where I can write like this, but I need to really put the work in. And the third is, I'll never be able to write like this.
Yeah.
Tananarive is that for me. Like, she writes like a paragraph, and I'm just like, I give up. I'm going to keep reading, but I give up as a writer, as trying to be a great writer. I'm just going to be an okay writer and be fine with that.
She is
Um,
absolutely a queen, just has to be said. So at NorwestCon, I ended up meeting her husband, Stephen Barnes.
oh,
He just
yeah,
sat
he's
at my
awesome.
table, but I didn't know that that's what, well, we were chatting about something else, and then we exchanged names, and he's like, I'm Stephen Barnes, and I was completely shocked. I was like, did you say you're Stephen fucking Barnes? And everybody in the room like heard it. I heard somebody like laughing. I'm like, right, sounds like this, you're supposed to play it cool. You're supposed to be like, that's chill. I'm just an extremely chill individual who got it all together. But it was
Yeah.
already too late for me because I was freaking out already.
I, like Grace, am a coward. So I was on a panel with Steven, and I dipped out right after the panel because I was way too afraid to approach that man. But it was awesome being on a panel with him. I'm glad you shouted out I Can Fix Her. I Can Fix Her's awesome. That was going to be one of my shout outs for this year. Another one I really liked this year, Eminence Front by Rebecca Rowland. This is a really awesome, like, suburban horror story it's about a lot of POVs, but it's basically this little suburb just devolving into chaos as this sort of like snow-based infection demon thing takes over the neighborhood. It's terrifying and it's really, really good. Highly recommend when it does hit the shelves. I think it's out there now, but Those are two. Another one that came out last year that I think everyone should read, if you like Western and horror hybrid stories. The Unkillable Frank Lightning is freaking awesome, by Josh Roundtree. Josh is a really good writer, and he's a lovely, lovely human. So if you've never read anything by Josh Roundtree, he's excellent at taking horror tropes and classic horror tales and kind of reweaving them into the weird Western sphere. And the Unkillable Frank Lightning is essentially a retelling of Frankenstein, but set in the Old West with like the Wild Bill Hickok show and everything like that. It's awesome. So if you like Frankenstein, you like Westerns, and you want to read a story that's sort of like Frankenstein reimagined with a strong female protagonist as Dr. Frankenstein, I highly recommend The Unkillable Frank Lightning. It's great. Um, Books that blew my mind recently or in the last few years. This one is 10 years old, but I'm still going to shout it out because it's one of the best collections I've ever read. It's The Collapse of Horses by Brian Evenson. Evenson is one of the best short story writers I've ever read. So if you like short stories at all, you should definitely pick up some Brian Evenson stuff. He's just phenomenal. But this collection is mind-blowingly good. It's one of the most tense, weird, just super evil collections I've ever read, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I don't have it physically, but another one that blew my mind in recent years from 2019 is A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs. Have any of y'all read that? It's great. So it's two novellas. So it comes out to be kind of like novel length, and it was awarded I think the Shirley Jackson Award, nominated for lots of things, including the World Fantasy Award. But it's two novellas. One is The Sea Dreams It Is the Sky, which is about a sort of like revolutionary poet from Latin America who returns to his homeland and then disappears, and his like protege slash friend goes down to try to find him in the war torn country. I can't remember which country, so I don't want to misquote it, but it is a South American country. She goes down there to try to find him and seek him out. It's an amazing story, super, super dark, super engaging. And the second one is My Heart Struck Sorrow, which is probably my favorite novella I've ever read, but it's about a pair of guys who work for the Library of Congress in the Jim Crow South, and their job is to try to categorize folk music from the emerging Black folk community, and they're doing this to try to like add it to the Library of Congress as a culturally relevant historical moment in time. And then they accidentally sort of stumble across this song that summons the devil. They have to kind of like piece together these different pieces of the song from different folk artists. And it's really, 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 really good. So highly recommend that as well. That's A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs. And yeah, I think that pretty much concludes our panel. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. The really cool thing about the horror community, listeners out there, is it's really small. And horror people are really nice because we bleed all of our evilness onto the page, and all that's left is sunshine and rainbows. And you will find this to be true. Horror people are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. And I have certainly found this to be true at StokerCon. So if you happen to be anywhere within the vicinity of Pittsburgh, when StokerCon is going down, you should come hang out with us. You should come meet. A lot of these authors we're recommending will literally be there. Pretty much the whole horror community shows out at conventions like this one, aside from Stephen King and Joe Hill. So that's always really cool. You should come check it out. Come meet some of your favorite horror authors at StokerCon, and come celebrate the Stoker Awards. And let's hope that all three of you win, because that would be sweet. I guess Neena and Grace can't both win, but hopefully one of you do. You know,
Cut
that
it
would
in
be sweet.
half.
Yeah. We'll see if they'll do that. We'll see if they'll-
Just trade the house back and forth.
Yeah, there you
Every
go.
couple days.
I don't know
love
if there's
that
ever been a tie, but that'd be sweet.
I mean, I love that I ended up being nominated even on the same list as Grace and Alice. And I'm like, and y'all meant to have me, right? Like that's where I'm supposed to be here, you know?
Well, that's how we feel about you coming on a panel with us. I guess I won't speak for Jeff, but that's how I feel. Thank you for gracing us with your wisdom and your presence and your really, really fun on camera personalities. Y'all rock at this. And you should all start your own podcasts, but, no pressure. Jeff, do you want to say any final words before we call it a day here?
Yeah, Grace had mentioned that broadly speaking, there are two types of horror writers and horror fans, and there's the sort of gore is more and the people that are looking for empathy. And the way that she writes is she exposes the vulnerabilities she has, and she tries to form a connection with the readers. And that it seems like one way that horror is changing and that books are finding success is that they are cutting through all of the static by creating a connection, allowing people to feel seen, and just sharing that empathy. And I think all of the authors on this panel do that wonderfully. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. Best of luck for the upcoming Stoker Awards, but no matter what happens, I think you are all fantastic, and thank you for being here today.
Oh, yeah. And one more time, Jeff, where can people find you online?
You can go to my site, jeffccarter.com, or Instagram at jeffc.carter. AC, where can people find you online?
acwise.net. I'm also on Blue Sky as ACWise and Instagram as ACWise.
Neena?
Well, y'all can find me on Instagram at Neena VL, and I'd also like to ask y'all to consider pre-ordering my next novel, which is coming out next month. Gotta
Do
scroll
it.
up. I'll Watch Your Baby, which is a supernatural retelling of America's most notorious welfare queen. And so we've talked on this episode about the lag between current events and what that means for contemporary fiction. But y'all, I'm so confident that the United States is not going to figure out the stereotypes in the welfare state before my book comes out. So I'm in the clear. Give it a pre-order, and you can follow me at Neena VL.
Yeah, I think you're good. Grace, how about you?
I'm at gracedalyauthor.com, and across social media, I am always at Grace Daly Author. I tried to keep it really easy. For all you Chicagoans out there, Daly is spelled Daly, not like the mayor. So pay attention to you Chicagoans. As far as social media goes, I am most active on Instagram. So if you really want to keep up to date with me, that's probably the best space on social media. But my website's always going to be up to date too.
Daily, not daily, just like it's Brige, not Bridget, right? So yes, thank you so much for being here. Once again, I am Clay Vermolum. I host the podcast Fermented Fiction. You can find us on Instagram mostly. You can also find me personally on Instagram if you want to buy my books and stuff at Clay Vermolum Fiction. And we go live with Fermented Fiction every single week, usually on a Wednesday or a Tuesday. This Wednesday, we're going live at 6:30 p.m. PST, and we are debating A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So you should come check that out. Thank you so much for being here on this panel. Panelists, thank you, listeners, for being here. Thank you, Jeff, for co-hosting with me. We'll see you next time. We'll be back with another episode later this year on short story collections, and we're going to try to cover all the Stoker categories, or at least most of them. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please subscribe and follow. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.